Sir, for the last time, you can't be here. This is cemetery property, and that plot is scheduled for administrative reclamation. The voice was sharp, edged with the brutal impatience of youth. Mr. Davies, the new cemetery director, stood with his hands on his hips. His crisp suit, a stark contrast to the weathered landscape of forgotten graves. He looked down at the old man kneeling in the grass, his posture a mix of official authority and personal irritation. The old man didn't look up. His hands, gnarled with age and mapped with the fine lines of 1,000 repairs, continued their work as he gently pressed the soil around the base of a small cluster of wild violets he had just planted. They were simple flowers, the kind that grew in ditches and along fence lines, but he treated them as if they were the rarest of orchids. His jacket was a faded olive drab, thin at the elbows, the kind of thing a man buys for function and keeps for decades out of habit. He wore it like a second skin. "Did you hear me, old-timer?" Davies pressed, taking a step closer, his polished leather shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. "This area is being cleared. The plot is unendowed, unclaimed, and frankly an eyesore. Your gardening," he said the word with a sneer, "is interfering with official cemetery business." The old man Samuel finally paused. He didn't turn his head, but his shoulders settled, a subtle shift that spoke of immense patience, of a stillness forged in crucibles Davies couldn't possibly imagine. He looked at the small weathered piece of wood he had driven into the earth years ago, serving as a marker where a marble stone should have been. Carved into it crudely but with undeniable care were 2 letters. "LB. He likes violets," Samuel said, his voice a low rumble, rough like stones in a riverbed. It wasn't an argument or a plea, just a statement of fact. Davies let out an exasperated sigh. This was the 3rd time this month he'd had to deal with this man. The first time he'd been polite, the second time firm, but now his patience was gone. He was a man with a 5-year plan, a vision of modernization for the historic but financially struggling Oakwood Cemetery, which included reclaiming abandoned plots to sell as premium real estate for the newly departed, as he liked to call them. This old man and his fixation on an anonymous patch of dirt were a stubborn, sentimental wrench in his efficient machine. "Listen, Pops, I don't know who he is, and frankly, it doesn't matter," Davies said, his tone dripping with condescension. "According to county records, this plot has been empty for over 60 years. There's no one here. It's a clerical error, a ghost in the ledger. So whatever little fantasy you've cooked up in your head ends today. Now gather your weeds and be on your way before I have you escorted out for trespassing." From a few rows over, a young woman named Clara watched the exchange. She was a doctoral student spending her summer combing through old cemetery records for her dissertation on forgotten local histories. She had noticed the old man before he came every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork. He never wept, he never prayed in any recognizable way. He simply tended to the small patch of earth-pulling weeds, planting humble flowers, and sometimes just sitting there with his back straight and his gaze fixed on the crude wooden marker. He was a silent, stoic monument to a memory no one else seemed to share. She saw the way Mr. Davies puffed out his chest, a bantam rooster asserting dominance over a creature he didn't understand. She saw the old man's stillness, the profound weight in his silence. It wasn't the silence of weakness or dementia. It was the silence of a mountain. Something about the scene felt deeply wrong, a desecration far worse than an untended grave. Davies, emboldened by the old man's lack of response, reached down and wrapped his fingers around the wooden marker. "And this piece of junk is coming with me," he grunted, preparing to pull it from the ground. The moment Davies's fingers brushed against the weathered wood, Samuel's hand shot out impossibly fast. He didn't grab Davies's arm in anger. He simply laid his hand over Davies's, a gentle, almost paternal gesture, but one that carried an electric current of absolute authority. Davies froze, startled by the sudden movement and the surprising strength in the old man's grip. The hand covering his was cool and dry, the skin like old leather, but the pressure was unyielding. The touch, the resistance, the scent of damp earth. It was a key turning a lock deep inside Samuel's mind. The manicured green of the cemetery dissolved. The warm afternoon sun vanished, replaced by a blinding, biting whiteness. The air, thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming roses, thinned into a razor-sharp wind that smelled of pine, iron, and fear. He was no longer 85. He was 22. His hands weren't gnarled. They were numb with frostbite wrapped around the stock of an M1 rifle. He was on a ridge somewhere north of the 38th parallel, a place the maps called Heartbreak and the men called Hell. The snow wasn't soft and white. It was a crust of ice over frozen mud, stained with the black and crimson of battle. And the hand he was holding wasn't the soft, manicured hand of a cemetery director. It was the hand of Private Leo Barnes. Leo, the fast-talking kid from Brooklyn, who said he was going to open a candy shop after the war, who could make anyone laugh, even when their rations were frozen solid, and their hope was wearing thin. Leo's hand was going cold. His face, pale and dusted with snow, was turned up to a merciless gray sky. His lips, chapped and blue, moved, forming a single whispered word. Home. We're going home, Leo. Samuel had whispered back, his own voice cracking. Just hold on. I'm going to carry you home. The memory was so vivid, so complete that Samuel's grip tightened on Davies's hand without him realizing it. His clear blue eyes, usually so placid, now stared through the young man, seeing a ghost on a frozen hillside, half a world and a lifetime away. Davies flinched, trying to pull his hand back, but the old man's grip was like a vice. For the first time, he felt a flicker of fear. There was something in the old man's eyes that wasn't old at all. It was ancient, dangerous, and filled with a sorrow so profound it was terrifying. Let go of me, Davies hissed, his voice trembling slightly. Samuel blinked. The Korean winter receded, and the warm Ohio afternoon rushed back in. He saw the fear on the young director's face. He saw his own hand, old and spotted, covering the other man's. He released his grip instantly. The strength vanished, and he was just an old man kneeling in the grass again. I'm sorry, Samuel said, the words barely a whisper. He looked at the wooden marker at the initials pound, and the promise he'd made came flooding back as fresh and raw as it was 65 years ago. I made a promise. Davies snatched his hand back, rubbing it as if it had been burned. His bravado returned, fueled by embarrassment and a lingering unease. A promise? You're trespassing, assaulting a cemetery official, and talking nonsense. I'm calling security. You have 1 minute to leave. He pulled out his phone, his fingers jabbing at the screen. Samuel slowly, painfully pushed himself to his feet. Every joint ached, a protest against the years and the miles. He gave the small grave one last look, his gaze lingering on the violets. He had failed. After all these years, he was failing Leo. He turned and began to walk away, his shoulders slumped, the weight of more than just his own years pressing down on him. Clara watched him go, her heart aching for him. She looked at Davies, who was now barking into his phone about a deranged vagrant. Then she looked back at the grave, unclaimed, unendowed, but not unloved. She took out her own phone, not to call security, but to take a picture of the simple wooden marker. LB2 letters carved into a piece of wood. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. A story was here. A forgotten history that a man in a crisp suit was determined to erase. And Clara was just as determined to bring it to light. She felt a surge of purpose, a historian's sacred duty to give voice to the silent. She would find out who Pound was, and she would uncover the story behind the old man's promise. The next morning, Clara was at the county archives before the doors even opened. The cemetery records had been a dead end, just as Davies had said. Plot C-218 was a phantom purchased in 1954 by an anonymous party with cash and never assigned a name. It was a blank page, but the old man wasn't a blank page. His devotion was a text, and she was going to learn how to read it. She started with the obvious. The man was a veteran. His jacket, his posture, his age all pointed to it. The Korean War was the most likely candidate. She began the painstaking process of cross-referencing military service records, looking for local soldiers with the initials Pound, who were listed as killed in action or missing in action between 1950 and 1953. The list was heartbreakingly long. Dozens of names scrolled by on the microfilm reader. Lawrence Bishop, Leonard Bradley, Lewis Bennett. Each one was a life cut short, a family shattered. But which one was the right one? For days she worked, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of urgency. She felt like she was in a race against Davies and his bulldozers. She created a spreadsheet noting regiments, dates of death, and hometowns. Nothing seemed to connect. She hit wall after wall. The records were often incomplete, faded, or redacted. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Her breakthrough came not from a government file, but from a local newspaper archive. She was scrolling through a digitized edition of the Oakley Town Chronicle from 1954 when a small article caught her eye.
Most of the documents she could access simply stated that the platoon was lost behind enemy lines during a reconnaissance mission code-named Operation Nightingale. Frustrated, Clara decided on a long shot. She had a contact, a professor emeritus who had once worked as a consultant for the Department of Defense Historical Office. She wrote a carefully worded email explaining her research into a forgotten soldier and mentioning Operation Nightingale, Corporal Samuel Croft, and Private Leo Barnes. She attached the photo of the wooden marker and described the quiet dignity of the old man tending the grave. She didn't know if anything would come of it, but she had to try. She hit send and leaned back in her chair, the weight of the mystery settling heavily upon her. Hundreds of miles away in the labyrinthine corridors of the Pentagon, that email began a journey of its own. It was flagged by an automated system for its keyword combination, Operation Nightingale. On sole survivor, it was passed from a junior archivist to a senior analyst, then to a department head. The name Nightingale was a ghost in the machine, a file so deeply buried that most didn't even know it existed. Finally, the query landed on the desk of General Mark Peterson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was a 4-star general, a man who commanded armies and advised presidents. His days were a whirlwind of geopolitical strategy and budgetary warfare. But he had started his career as a young military historian, and he had a deep abiding reverence for the institution and the men who had bled for it. His aide, a crisp young major, stood at attention. "Sir, a query from the historical office. It references Operation Nightingale." Pearson looked up from a satellite intelligence briefing, his brow furrowed. The name was a distant bell tolling in his memory. He had come across it once years ago when he was a young captain given the enviable task of reviewing the service records of Medal of Honor recipients whose citations remain classified. "Nightingale," he said, the word tasting like rust and ice. "Give me the file. Level 9 clearance. Eyes only." The major nodded, his face impassive, but his mind raced. Level 9 was a clearance reserved for the most sensitive operations in American history. Within an hour, a single slender file bound in dark red leather was placed on the general's immense mahogany desk. The cover was stamped with a single word, Nightingale. General Peterson dismissed his aide and opened the file. The paper inside was brittle with age. The story it told was one of almost unbelievable courage and sacrifice. In the winter of 1952, a platoon from Charlie Company was sent on a suicide mission deep into enemy territory to destroy a critical supply bridge. They were to be a ghost platoon. No support, no radio contact, no expectation of return. They succeeded in their mission, but were ambushed and overwhelmed during their exfiltration. The entire platoon was wiped out except for one man, Corporal Samuel Croft. The file detailed how Croft, wounded by shrapnel in his leg and shoulder, had managed to evade capture. But he wasn't alone. He found his friend Private Leo Barnes clinging to life, his chest riddled with machine gun fire. The official report, compiled from Croft's debriefing after his eventual rescue, was stark and clinical, but Peterson could read between the lines, envisioning the hell that wasn't written down. For 3 days and 3 nights, in a blizzard with enemy patrol sweeping the mountains, Samuel Croft carried Leo Barnes on his back. He fashioned a crude sledge from his rifle and a torn piece of canvas. He gave Leo his own rations, melted snow in his mouth to give him water, and whispered stories of home to keep him conscious. He was trying to carry his friend back to friendly lines. A one-man rescue mission fueled by a desperate promise. On the 3rd night, huddled in a shallow cave, Leo Barnes died in Samuel's arms. The report included a direct quote from Samuel's debrief. He just got quiet. I told him we were almost home. I think he believed me. Samuel, nearly dead himself from exhaustion, starvation in his wounds, spent the next 6 hours digging a grave in the frozen earth with his bare hands and his bayonet. He wrapped Leo in his own winter parka, placed his friend's dog tags back around his neck, and said the Lord's Prayer. He marked the spot on his map, a map he later had to burn to avoid capture. He was taken prisoner by a Chinese patrol the next morning, delirious and suffering from severe frostbite. He spent the next year in a POW camp. When he was finally liberated, he was awarded the Medal of Honor in a quiet classified ceremony. The citation spoke of valor above and beyond the call of duty. But the true story of Operation Nightingale was deemed too sensitive to release. The mission had violated the terms of a secret truce negotiation. Samuel Croft was sworn to secrecy. He never spoke of it again. He was given his medal in a small box, and he went home. General Peterson closed the file, his chest tight with emotion. He looked at the email from the historian, at the picture of the simple wooden marker with the initials pound. He looked at the description of the old man quietly planting flowers. It all clicked into place. Samuel Croft had never forgotten. For 65 years, he had kept his silent vigil. The plot of the cemetery wasn't empty. It was a cenotaph, a place of memory, a promise made manifest in soil and flowers. He had bought it in 1954. A piece of Ohio that was standing for a piece of frozen Korean earth he could never visit again. A cold fury began to build in the general's chest. A hero of Samuel Croft's stature, a living legend, was being threatened, called a vagrant, and dismissed as a crazy old man by some bureaucratic paper pusher. It was a desecration of everything the uniform stood for. He picked up his secure phone. "Get me my car," he commanded, his voice like cold steel. "And get me the commandant of the Marine Corps' honor guard. We're going to Oakley, Ohio, and find out who the director of the Oakwood Cemetery is. I want to have a word with him." 2 days later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Oakwood Cemetery. Mr. Davies was feeling pleased with himself. The vagrant problem, as he termed it, was resolved. He had secured a restraining order against Samuel Croft, and today his work crew was here to finally reclaim plot C-118. A small yellow backhoe idled nearby, its metal bucket glinting in the light. As if on cue, Samuel Croft appeared at the edge of the cemetery, walking slowly but with resolute purpose. He ignored the no trespassing sign Davies had personally posted. He walked straight toward the grave, his face a mask of quiet grief. He was violating a court order, but he didn't care. He wasn't going to let them erase Leo. Davies saw him coming and felt a flash of triumph. Now he had him. He would have the old man arrested. "That's it," he shouted to his foreman. "Call the police. I want this man removed and charged." He marched over to intercept Samuel, puffing out his chest. "I warned you, old man. You are now under arrest for criminal trespassing. You brought this on yourself." Samuel didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the backhoe, a yellow vulture poised to desecrate holy ground. He simply walked past Davies and stood in front of the grave, planting his feet. He spread his arms slightly, a frail, elderly barrier against the machine. "You will not touch this grave," he said, his voice quiet, but ringing with an authority that had commanded men in battle. The foreman hesitated, looking from the determined old man to his boss. Just then, a sound cut through the morning quiet. It was a low, powerful rumble of multiple large vehicles. At the cemetery's main gate, a procession of black government sedans swept in, followed by a large passenger van, moving with a speed and purpose utterly out of place among the tombstones. The convoy rolled to a stop on the narrow asphalt path just yards from the confrontation. Doors opened in unison. Marines in crisp dress blues emerged, their movements sharp and synchronized, forming to perfect ranks. From the lead car stepped a man who radiated an aura of command that made Mr. Davies' manufactured authority seem like a child's game. General Mark Peterson in his full Class A uniform, his chest a brilliant constellation of ribbons and medals, strode forward, his 4 silver stars glittering on his shoulders. The cemetery fell silent as the work crew stared, mouths agape, and Davies' face went pale. A sickening feeling rising that his 5-year plan was about to be spectacularly derailed. General Peterson ignored Davies completely, his eyes sharp and intelligent, locked on the old man in the faded jacket as he walked across the grass. Paulus shoe silent until he stood directly in front of Samuel Croft. For a moment the two men simply looked at each other, the highest-ranking officer in the United States military and a forgotten corporal. An ocean of time and experience passing between them in silence. Then Peterson's back went ramrod straight as he brought his hand up in a salute so sharp. He seemed to cut the air. "Corporal Samuel Croft," he said, his voice booming with deep respect. "It is an honor, sir." Samuel, stunned, slowly returned the salute with a shaky but dignified motion, a tear tracing down his cheek, the first in 65 years. Davies watched, mind unable to process it. "Corporal, sir, General, sir, I don't understand. This man was trespassing. He's a nobody." Peterson dropped his salute but kept his eyes on Samuel, speaking to Davies in a lethally cold voice. "A nobody? Son, you are standing in the presence of a hero who defines the very meaning of honor and courage. You are not fit to speak his name, let alone judge him." He turned to Davies fully, eyes blazing. "This nobody is Corporal Samuel Croft.